for liquidity.
Exactly. And the VIX, which is the index that measures market volatility and fear.
Fear index, yeah.
It spiked almost 10% to close at 23.57. Brent crude oil jumped roughly 13% in just 2 days.
And we saw these massive sector shifts, right? Money flooded out of tech and semiconductor stocks and poured directly into defense, military, and energy equities.
Mm-hmm.
But reading through the financial data, there was this glaring anomaly that just fascinated me.
Yeah.
Because it breaks the fundamental rules of how markets are supposed to behave during a war.
The bond market.
Yes. Normally, government bonds are the ultimate safe haven. When geopolitical disaster strikes, investors sell their risky equities and buy government bonds because they offer a guaranteed fixed yield.
Right. That is the traditional defensive playbook. You flee to safety, and bonds are the bedrock of safety.
But the playbook completely failed here. The bonds didn't protect anyone. Normally, government bonds act as the shock absorbers of the global economy. But when the crisis is driven by a massive spike in energy prices, it's like discovering your shock absorbers are made of glass, right?
Yeah.
The very thing causing the bumpy ride is what shatters the bond's fixed yield. The yields on bonds went up, meaning their actual price crashed. And central banks signaled they couldn't cut interest rates due to surging inflation fears.
Exactly.
Help me understand the mechanics of this. Why does an energy crisis destroy a government bond?
It all comes down to the mortal enemy of a fixed yield asset, which is inflation.
Okay.
Let's look at the math. If you buy a quote-unquote safe government bond that pays you a fixed 4% return every year, you feel pretty secure.
Right.
But when Brent crude oil jumps 13% over a single weekend because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, the cost of transporting goods, manufacturing products, and heating buildings, all of that spikes universally.
And that guarantees a massive wave of inflation.
Right.
Because every company passes those increased energy costs directly to the consumer.
Exactly. So if that energy shock drives global inflation up to, say, 6% or 8%, your safe bond paying 4% is suddenly wielding a negative real return.
You're losing money.
You are mathematically losing purchasing power every single day you hold it. So the market looked at the blockade and realized, wait, this isn't just a geopolitical crisis, this is an inflation crisis.
So investors couldn't hide in bonds because the inflation would just eat the yield alive.
Yep. And furthermore, central banks use high interest rates to fight inflation. So the market realized central banks would be forced to keep rates painfully high, which suppresses economic growth across the board.
So the safe haven was basically an illusion.
Totally.
Because the nature of the crisis fundamentally changed the value of money itself. The capital had nowhere to hide, which I think leads us to the final and maybe most complex domino in this chain.
Right. The tech sector.
Because the market didn't just punish tech and semiconductor stocks arbitrarily. It wasn't just a broad sense of panic.
No, it was a highly calculated repricing of the physical reality of making technology.
Yeah.
There is a direct, undeniable chain of causality from those liquefied natural gas ships trapped in the Middle East straight to the sterile clean rooms manufacturing microchips in East Asia.
Right. And I want to trace that physical chain for the listener, because you might think a Middle East conflict only affects the price of gas for your car, but it's actually threatening the cost of the smartphone in your pocket.
Oh, absolutely.
So it starts with the bottleneck at the Strait.
Yeah.
Suddenly, 23% of the world's LNG is cut off from the global market. The countries that rely on importing that gas to run their power plants are now suddenly bidding against each other for a shrinking supply.
Which means the cost of burning fuel to create electricity skyrockets for those nations. And utility companies do not just absorb those catastrophic losses.
No, they definitely don't.
Right. They pass the premium directly on to the industrial power grids.
Which brings that massive electricity bill right to the doorstep of the semiconductor foundries, the fabs.
Yeah.
I think there's a misconception that making a microchip is like assembling a smartphone. It's not.
Huh.
It is one of the most energy-intensive manufacturing processes in human history.
It really is.
Yeah.
And to understand the vulnerability here, you have to look at the machines that actually print the circuits onto the silicon.
Okay.
The most advanced chips, the ones powering global AI and advanced military hardware, they're created using extreme ultraviolet lithography, or EUV machines.
EUV machines. And these are just like large printers, right?
Right.
I was reading about the physics behind EUV lithography,
Yeah.
and it literally sounds like science fiction.
Oh, it's remarkably complex. An EUV machine generates extreme ultraviolet light by firing a high-powered industrial laser at microscopic droplets of molten tin.
Molten tin.
Yeah, and it vaporizes them into plasma, 50,000 times a second.
That is insane.
Right, and this process requires just massive, continuous streams of electricity.
I can imagine.
Furthermore, generating that plasma creates intense heat, so the machines require equally massive, power-hungry cooling systems just to prevent them from melting down.
Wow.
You cannot run an EUV machine on a low-power setting to save money on your electric bill. The energy demand is absolute and inflexible.
So when the price of LNG spikes, the electricity costs for these fabs explode, directly inflating the base cost of producing a microchip.
Exactly.
A war in the Middle East literally dictates the cost of the AI servers sitting in a data center in California.
It's all connected.
But looking at the briefings, this energy shock didn't hit everyone equally, did it? It exposed a structural vulnerability in the East Asian semiconductor triad, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea.
Right.
These three regions produce the vast majority of the world's advanced chips, but their ability to survive this crisis depends entirely on their domestic energy grids.
Yeah, analysts look at a metric called energy resilience.
Energy resilience, okay.
So Japan, for example, has a diverse energy mix that includes a baseline of nuclear power. Nuclear plants don't rely on a constant weekly stream of imported gas ships.
You're right, they're much more insulated.
Exactly. South Korea also operates a heavy nuclear baseline, providing a buffer against sudden fossil fuel shocks, though, they still import significant amounts of energy.
But Taiwan is a completely different story.
Taiwan's energy grid is highly vulnerable to this specific kind of blockade. They import roughly 97% of their energy needs.
97%.
Yeah, and their grid is overwhelmingly reliant on imported natural gas and coal. So when the Strait of Hormuz closes, a foundry operating in Taiwan feels that price shock in their electricity bill almost immediately.
Right.
And much more severely than a foundry operating in a country with a nuclear buffer.
So how do they adapt? I mean, these are trillion-dollar technology giants, but they are trapped by the physics of their own manufacturing. Can they pivot?
Not really. They face a pretty brutal economic choice. They either absorb the inflated electricity costs, which means their profit margins compress and their stock price tanks,
Right.
or they pass the cost of the chips onto the tech companies buying them.
But if you pass the cost along, everything from laptops to electric vehicles to enterprise AI infrastructure becomes significantly more expensive.
Yep. Which cools global demand. It is a mathematical trap forced entirely by energy dependence. The most advanced, cutting-edge technology on the planet was essentially brought to its knees by the closure of a geographic shipping lane used since antiquity.
It's wild. Let's pull back and look at the entire map we just laid out, because it is an incredible sequence of events.
It really is.
We started with the collapse of diplomacy in Geneva. 48 hours later, an air campaign involving 200 jets and 1,200 munitions fundamentally dismantles the leadership of Iran, utilizing sequential bunker busters to penetrate deep underground.
Right, and then that kinetic strike triggers the geographic retaliation.
Yeah.
The mining and blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, effectively choking off a quarter of the world's liquefied natural gas.
And the threat of that missing energy creates this terrifying inflation scenario, breaking the bond market, as investors realize fixed yields are completely useless when the cost of living and manufacturing is skyrocketing.
Exactly. And finally, that energy inflation travels straight into the industrial power grids of East Asia, jacking up the electricity costs required to vaporize tin into plasma.
50,000 times a second.
Right, fundamentally threatening the foundries that manufacture the architecture of the digital age.
It is a stark reminder of the physical reality of our world.
Yeah.
You cannot analyze a geopolitical conflict without understanding the maritime insurance markets, the bond yields, and the energy demands of semiconductor lithography. They are all gears in the exact same machine.
Yeah, it requires looking past the headlines of military action to see the invisible supply chains that actually sustain modern civilization.
And that leads me to a final thought, something I want you to mull over as you digest all of this.
Yeah.
We spend so much time obsessing over the digital future. The cloud, artificial intelligence, virtual environments.
Yeah.
We talk about technology as if it exists purely in the ether, untethered from the dirt and the water of the earth. But if a single 21-mile geographic choke point in the Middle East can cut off the physical fuel required to power the lasers that print our microchips, are we entering a new era where control over old world physical geography is ultimately the master of new world artificial intelligence?
It's a heavy question.
Whoever controls the physical energy dictates the limits of the digital mind. Think about the sheer weight of that connection. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and keep exploring the incredible, fragile mechanics of the world around you.